I'm just going to turn the time over to Maven, if you will introduce yourself, and then we'll follow up with Morgan.
Perfect.
All right, so I'm Maven. I started in the podcast circuit, I guess, in the Exmo sphere under Mormon discussions, which is how I found out about you, Marty. Morgan, I actually watched your early, like when you, I think you started your channel early on in my deconstruction, and I found you kind of early on there. My channel is new and fresh, and I'm struggling. I appreciate you guys being willing to do this with me to talk about this, but it's called When We Choose. And overall, it's, I guess, a way for me to kind of combine two passion subjects of mine, and that is reproductive rights and then advocacy against child abuse. And to me, they come under the same category because it's about bodily autonomy and respecting that and not harming others. So to me, those are very, very much combined. And so basically almost anything that will fall or be like remotely related to those issues are things that I hope to cover.
Awesome. All right, Morgan.
I also got my famous start in the ex-Mormon community back in the day, my spiritual life, when I started vlogging just about my issues and concerns with Mormonism and kind of how it was affecting me and my family and how I was working through that. Now I do some YouTubing actually on a channel called Understanding You, where I more just talk about self-improvement, like self-help kind of things. I talk about books I'm reading and movies I'm watching and just have fun and interesting discussions kind of on that topic. So politics is not my main focus, but we thought this would be a really interesting discussion to have an ex-Mormon and Mormon kind of share different perspectives on this topic. Yeah, so that's why we're here.
Well, there's no Mormons here, but all ex-Mormons.
Yeah, I was going to say, wait, yeah.
Oh, whoops.
Perspective. Yeah.
2 ex-Mormons sharing very different opinions.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I just want to say, Morgan, like for what you did, I think I've said this to you before, but I want to say it publicly again. The fact that you started to talk about things while you were in the middle of everything is really, really brave to me. When I'm working through things or struggling on my own, I keep that shit like really on lockdown, and I do not share with anybody, even people close to me. So that was something I think I really, really appreciated about what you were doing at the time. And I just found that to be really brave and something that I couldn't do and probably still wouldn't do, honestly.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
That's awesome. But we're going to start with kind of what your position is, and then the other side will repeat it back and then make sure you have it right, and then some questions. So let's just do that first phase. And once we get past that first phase, then I'll describe the next phase. So should do a coin flip, or do you guys have does someone want to volunteer to go first?
I'll go first, I guess.
Yeah, okay.
Go down here. It's a bit of a ramble. And it's, I guess
I am going to time
the timer, right?
Yeah, I'll set the timer for 5 minutes, and when it gets close, I'll put it up on the screen too.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So do I need to watch this? Okay. All right. We'll say it's starting. So I'm going to flip over to my notes. So for me, an analogy of, I think, going from the so-called pro-life to so-called pro-choice is really, really, I think, matches kind of the deconstruction experience from Christianity. A lot of the things that you previously thought to be based on facts and good morals often turn out to be wrong on both fronts. And it's only, kind of on the other side that you see the harm and I guess why things that seem to make sense before, when you have more facts and data, actually don't. And just one example of that is how I hear a lot of people say that when they leave their church or their religion that they grew up in, that they feel that their morals and actions often align more with Jesus, and they feel more moral and like living according to their conscience than they were able to before. So it's kind of like that. My position on the pro-life movement is the same. As good as it sounds in theory, I find it to be at odds with reality. I think it's pro-life in name and in name only. It begins and ends there. And when you look at the actual results, it's just cruelty and suffering, primarily for women and children, but it does extend to undermine every other aspect of a healthy cooperative society. I think it undermines democracy, and there's good evidence to back that. And so I know why it doesn't feel that it's that way on the pro-life side, but that doesn't make it untrue when we're looking at the facts. And so if I were to take my position further, I would be hard pressed to say that there's any benefit to taking control of someone else's reproductive rights and their organs and their family planning against their will. Even from the viewpoint of the unborn being babies and deserving full personhood, it's still ultimately a failure because pro-choice initiatives that focus more on consent and bodily autonomy reduce abortions more than abortion bans do. So yeah, that's the end of it. I didn't see any timer pop up, so I don't know if I was getting close to the time or not. So I apologize if I was.
So you are, I think I started it late, but I think you were well within, you were like it
was probably like 3 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
That was great. It was great.
Yep.
Did I
So
miss
now I get to ask follow up, and then I try to repeat back, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I guess one clarifying question I would ask is, do you feel like there's ever a point where, and I think you answered it because you said there's never really a benefit to taking control of other people's bodies. So you don't have like a line in the sand, like beyond this many weeks of pregnancy, I don't think people should be allowed to have an abortion or anything like that.
Right. People have asked if that's something I would be willing to compromise on. And I kind of have like, like if it were, for the result of at least making things better and safer, like in the country as a whole, I would say maybe. But the reason why I'm a fan of no limitations is because the latest abortions are medically necessary. They're wanted pregnancies where something has gone very, very wrong with either the fetus or with the mother. And so I know, again, if we're talking about theory, like you could say in theory, my position would mean that someone at 37 weeks could go, I changed my mind, I want to abort this baby. But the reality is that just doesn't happen. So I guess that's why I have that position. And so I want to, I guess, clarify that, because when people hear that, especially if it's just from the pro-life side, that's what it sounds like to them, I think. And maybe you can back me up on that if that's the reality. But I feel like that's what people assume, is that if someone like me says I don't agree in any position or any kind of cutoff, that's what it sounds like, that someone at 8 or 9 months can just be like, never mind, or even up to like right before birth. And that's just not reality, as far as I know. So if that were a common reality, that would be an interesting discussion to have, I guess.
Okay. So I think if I'm hearing you right, you're saying in response to that you just don't feel like it's something that's really a concern, since it sounds like most abortions, which is true, like statistically, most abortions happen within that 13-week range. So you're like,
yeah,
we don't really need a cutoff, and
right.
that ones that are happening that late are like medically necessary. So kind of like, I would hate if someone were to change their mind at 37 weeks, but you just feel like that doesn't really happen, so we don't need a cutoff. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. In the third trimester, and this is also where I feel like the messaging on the other side is one that's like really gory. And it's like, if someone did change their mind at 37 weeks, then, doctors are going in with the scalpel and just like chopping it up and, pulling out arms and legs, from a womb, when really in the third trimester, when an abortion is necessary, it's almost always an induction, because the baby is not going to survive anyway, or it may have already passed, or just might not be viable. And induction, it has risks as well, but nobody's cutting open and doing like surgical abortions that far along. It'll be an induction, and the baby will, if it's not dead by the time it's birthed, it'll usually die very shortly after.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to repeat back your stance, Maven, and you let me know if you're happy with the way that I'm saying it. You correct me if I don't say it right. So you had an analogy of comparing deconstructing
Mormon.
like
I use
Mormonism,
Christianity
right?
in general.
Christianity and the pro-life, pro-choice movement. And you said that upon further investigation with more facts and data, you felt like it was very self-evident that the harm being done with the pro-life movement was far more than you had ever realized, to the point where it convinced you that pro-choice would be better off, for everybody.
Yeah.
How's that so far?
That's perfect. And I did
Awesome.
want to clarify too that for me, this all happened. I was pro-choice, I think, about a decade before I ever even left Mormonism. So I know a lot of people think that these stances come with deconstruction, and they often do, like many things do, like purity culture or homophobia or things like that we might be raised with. But for me personally, pro-choice actually happened very early on, and I didn't see any conflict with being Mormon and being pro-choice.
So I'll finish summarizing your side, which was the pro-life movement undermines democracy, and that there's no benefit to taking control of other people's bodies.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome.
Okay. Is there any further clarification? Because I guess what's hard is I know you guys are reasonable. I'm really, I guess, come into contact with the most unreasonable side, and so that's why I guess one thing that I don't know if you feel you can represent, even if it's not you specifically. Do you know what I mean? This will be another sidebar, I think.
Yeah,
But
no, I
when
think
I
we
brought
can
up
do
how
that later on.
no limits, that I know even if you're not thinking that, I know people are thinking like chopping babies' arms off out of the womb. You know what I mean? And so that's why, like, I would hate to feel like I don't address some of those, even if they're not yours.
Okay.
I guess, Marty,
well, you did. I thought you did a good job addressing it, but I mean, we can address it again too.
Yeah, I maybe have a clarifying question, or at least a hypothetical. I know you hate those, but I think it serves a purpose for not being able to like fact check something on the fly. So in the situation that an abortion procedure were going to happen, say at 37 weeks, and you're saying that it's usually just an induction, if it involved also some procedure before the induction that killed the fetus, even though the fetus could be viable, would you be against that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. So
you're saying
for someone changing
they're
their
not going
mind.
in there. Yeah, you're saying they're not
Yeah.
going in there and like cutting off limbs and stuff
Yeah.
at 37 weeks, that they're just doing an induction, and that the baby naturally dies in the process because it's a medically necessary abortion.
Yeah.
And so
The hypothetical is a viable pregnancy.
it's a viable pregnancy,
Mhm.
and it's an abortion. And in order to do the abortion, they know the baby will survive at 37 weeks. I mean, I had my kid at 37 weeks. So they know it's going to survive. And so they do a procedure to kill the fetus before it's delivered. Would you be not okay with that?
So the feeling I'm feeling is I dislike that, but I still, it's none of my business. So I would not say that we should legislate that.
Okay.
I think I know where you're coming from, because your whole thing is like, you don't want to draw any line where someone wouldn't be able to have it if they needed it, right?
Yeah.
That's okay. I think I understand where you're coming from with that.
And the thing with hypotheticals,
the only reason I wanted to clarify that is because that is my understanding, is that those late term abortions, they do a pre-procedure so that the fetus is not alive. And I could be wrong about that, but that's my understanding. And so when you said that doesn't happen, I was like, well, if it did happen, would you still be okay with it? And it sounds like that you would be. And so that's just I didn't want that to be the reason you were okay with it, if it was based on something that isn't according to my understanding, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, no, I get it. Ultimately, my concern is bodily autonomy. And so whether or not my personal feelings are that I like or dislike what somebody does with their body. That's the whole point, is that that's not my business to make decisions for someone else's body, just like I wouldn't want them making decisions for mine, that I wouldn't want. And I was going to say something. I was gonna say, like, if I'm trying to put myself in this place where at 37 weeks, I'm that far pregnant. And I guess just to be clear, also for our audience, I'm the only one of the three of us that has not ever been pregnant or given birth. You two have, so those are experiences you have that I don't. So yeah, put that out there. So again, so now I just have to really basically imagine, like I said, by the time you get that far in pregnancy, these are wanted pregnancies. And I really, even as someone who's childless and like at this point wants to remain that way, I really struggle to see how someone could get that far in pregnancy and just change their mind. But let's say, like I was saying, my understanding is that there's always something wrong, and the fetus is not viable. I guess that negates the whole thing, because your thing is if the fetus is viable. But I guess, no, this is why I wanted to address it, with your understanding that something is done to stop the fetus's heart or do whatever, like if it is technically still alive before it's going to be induced, something is given to kill it first. I'm also in an area where I don't know, so I would assume that whatever they do to induce is the thing that may kill the fetus, or I guess we'll say baby at this point, because it is like developed enough, right? Well, unless something went wrong, which is usually what the case is. But anyway, I would think that it's the induction itself that is going to cause that to happen anyway. Or let's say I'm 37 weeks, something's wrong with my baby, it's not going to survive, or it's not going to survive long, especially if I have any idea that the baby is going to suffer the longer it's alive. I think I would prefer that something like peacefully end it before it's induced, if it's going to be just like gasping for air, or or in some kind of a pain, or dying involves a lot of bodily processes that can be very painful as things are like starting to shut down and whatnot. So I could see myself choosing that as a more humane option for a baby that I know that's not going to survive anyway. I guess that's what I'll say for that.
Yeah. I totally understand where you're coming from with that. Like, as far as you're like, I don't see that that's happening, but if it was happening, I would not like that. But also, I don't want to draw a line where someone else who needs it won't be able to get it. Right. Right. I'm following
Even
you.
like in that scenario, I would still want to choose. So I wouldn't want the doctor saying this is what we're going to do. I mean, unless it's like there's a one is going to be malpractice or something like that. I don't think that's the case. I would think, again, that I'm out of my depth here, but I would hope that the doctor would give me a choice. If it's going to be induced anyway, I don't know, maybe I don't want to kill it before I have to deliver it. Maybe I want to hold it while it's still living for a little bit, maybe, I don't know. And I feel like I should be able to choose that too, if there's not anything like super wrong. Sitting here, I don't like that idea, because I like the idea of it suffering less and not wanting to like hold it. But I wouldn't know my feelings in that actual situation. Maybe like that would be the last thing I want, like in the whole world, is just to be able to hold that baby for just a little bit before it goes. I don't know. I just, it's the choice that matters. And I feel like different women would choose different things for different reasons, and they should have, especially in such a tragic situation, I think as much choice and control over what's happening as possible. So
I think that's very real. Yeah. Like, would I want the kid to suffer, or would I want to be able to hold them for a little bit? Like, heartbreaking. Yeah.
I can
heartbreaking.
Say I choose.
Very relatable.
I kind of say like I don't actually know. And then the same with abortion. Like, even when I was first pro-choice, I was like, I would never get an abortion, but I can see why other people would. And then I just realized, like, most people aren't planning to get abortions, and just from stories I've read from other women, a lot of time, I never thought I would get an abortion. I never thought I would ever, and then it's like, here I am. So I realized just recently, like, I can't say that even now. I would never, because maybe I would anyway.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you, Maven.
Sorry, can I bring up something about hypotheticals? I know I'm the one that brought it up, and I see their use for things, but I just have this sense that in general, in this in the whole discussion broadly, that the hypotheticals from the pro-life side are more often than not like just not based in reality, whereas the hypotheticals on, and this is a perception of mine, so feel free to correct it, but I feel like the hypotheticals on my side actually represent like real case scenarios. You know, we're talking about, you know, minors, we're talking about children who are raped, we're talking about babies with like this issue, that issue, or, you know, I feel like we're talking about stories, real stories of things that have happened to women. And so I feel like even in the hypotheticals, there's kind of an imbalance, and they do tend to kind of, Marti, kind of, the hypotheticals always paint women in a bad or harsh light, whereas ours are more real and human. That's
I I hear where you're coming from, because it's like you're like, well, our hypotheticals are not hypothetical, they're like actually happening. Your hypotheticals are blown out of proportion, right? And but I think there's a lot of pro-life people that feel that way about pro-choice people too, of like, no, our hypotheticals are the real ones and theirs are the ones that aren't real. So it's hard to say, but putting that all aside, the beauty of hypotheticals is that it helps us find the line.
Yeah.
With hypotheticals, I think what we're actually trying to find is, where do you draw the line and why? So I think that's the power of hypotheticals.
Agreed. I definitely agree they're useful. And it troubles me if people can't operate in there, like if they literally can't have discussions like that. Because to me, that's a sign of, I think, like indoctrination or brainwashing. It's something that I see in Mormons sometimes, like if they can't even play then it's like there's something it's thought stopping, like that's literally what's happening. But anyway, so I agree. I just wanted to, I guess, kind of point that out, that that's how I feel about it, and maybe we can address it more as we go up. Okay,
that's totally fair. I just wanted to add one thing. I do feel like hypotheticals are usually operating in a rarity situation. You wouldn't need a hypothetical if it was common and it happens all the time, that you would no longer be in hypothetical land. And so the reason I even bring up a hypothetical like I did was for the purpose of that rare case, right? So, and it's the same thing, I feel like, on both sides. Usually it's brought up, and well, hypothetically, you know, someone gets raped and this and this and this happens, right? And even though you can't point to the real story where that happened, it still could happen, right? So anyways,
those things stay a rarity.
Awesome.
Okay, so let's go ahead.
Let's
go ahead, and I think I'll put Morgan on the screen if I can figure it out.
Awesome. All right, so my stance on this is that I think every human life has value. And I think that we have to find a way to treat every human life as if it has equal value. And I think one of my problems with abortion is that it creates this kind of imbalance of human life, of like, okay, we're going to prioritize the life of the mother, but not the life of the child. And to me, it's this, okay, not all human life is equal. And it gets really dicey in my mind really fast. Like, how do you determine which lives have more value than other lives? I feel like that's really scary, and it's so open to subjective error and subjective opinion. So I don't like that. I like the idea that every life has value, every life has equal value, and I don't think that the value of someone's life should change because of how old someone is, because of someone being disabled, because of someone suffering or causing suffering or anything like that, or being poor or in difficult circumstances. I just don't think that that should alter how we treat that human life, and especially with regards to the law, because I think that's the purpose that we have law and order, is so that we can protect all lives. And I think that the law should do that. And I think it should treat every life like it should be protected and valued. I do think that there is appropriate time an appropriate time for an abortion. And I think that is if the life of the mother is in jeopardy. And I think that the reason I feel comfortable saying that and feeling like it's still morally consistent is that in my mind, if you've got the mother's going to die, well, obviously, if she has a 20-week-old baby, like the baby's also going to die. And so if you can only save one of them, I would rather save one life than lose both of them. So I do feel it's appropriate to have an abortion in the case where the mother's life is in danger. I also want to, in my opening stance, just talk about the fact that I am not religious. I consider myself agnostic. Like, I hope God's real. I hope God's real and he's not an asshole, because that'd be great. But I'm not religious. And so I want to point that out, because I know some people will say, oh, it's just because of your religious brainwashing or whatever. That, and I'm just like, well, I don't really necessarily believe in God. So I just believe in trying to treat all life with equal value. I'm pro sex ed. I think it's weird that there are some people out there that will say, "Oh yeah, no, don't teach your kids about, don't let your kids learn about sex ed in school or whatever." And I'm like, I think you should teach it to them at home. That would be better. But they should be taught it regardless would be great. I think that they'd be better off. I'm also pro birth control. I don't have any issues with birth control. And I'm also against the death penalty. I just want to point that out, because I know that some people would consider that morally inconsistent, like to be pro the death penalty, but not pro, life. Or you get what I'm saying. Anyway, moral of the story is I don't like killing. And yeah, so I think my stance overall just kind of comes back to, I think every human life has value, and I just want to treat it all as equally as we possibly can. And I think a lot of this is kind of founded too on the idea that, in my mind, like when I think about I don't want to make this like too emotional, but I'll use my brother as an example. Like, I remember when my mom was pregnant with my brother and we saw the ultrasound, and he was like, 14 weeks or whatever, wiggling around in there. And I was just thinking to myself, like, as I've gone back and forth about pro-life and pro-choice in my adulthood, I just remember thinking, like, at 14 weeks, that little wiggling baby was Parker. He didn't turn into Parker after he was born. He was Parker back when he was, a 14-week little jelly bean. And it's hard for me to conceptualize anything other than that. Because I just, I guess I just like to think that life has to start somewhere, right? And it's hard for me to think of drawing the line anywhere else other than conception. So yeah, that's my little opening stance.
Awesome.
So you can ask questions, right? Or just repeat it back, whichever. Wait, I don't think
I didn't realize I was muted.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, so it's the restatement first and then clarification.
You can ask clarifying questions while you're restating if you need to. That's totally fair game.
No, I feel like I understand. I was trying to take notes too.
Cool.
But I see where you're saying that I guess it's scary for you that if we're saying that a fetus is worth less, as a life than the mother, and even in cases where not non-viability, but where there's disabilities, things like that. I know some people feel like that sounds kind of like eugenicist, basically, and so that's what I was hearing from you. There's this kind of this fear of like, what's the slippery slope in deciding like what lives are valuable and not? Right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, and then I don't know. I feel like I understood everything else, but
perfect.
I also feel like I should state it just to make sure, I guess. I don't know, like, life has to start somewhere. I would agree with most people saying like you kind of either view it as conception or birth. From my position, it actually doesn't matter to me. We could talk about that later, but I understand. And I think even for a lot of hypotheticals, or maybe even for the whole discussion, I could even just give it and we'll just say like, yeah, life starts at conception, and still discuss it from there. I get that. When you, I do have some clarifying questions. When you were talking about not wanting like suffering or poverty or things like that to be involved, I'm wondering what you meant by that, because again, for me, the issue is autonomy. And so I, when I bring up things like suffering or abuse or poverty or things like this that will likely affect children of mothers who would have aborted if they had a chance, it's not to say that poor women shouldn't have children, or that disabled children should not be born. But again, it always comes down to the choice of the woman. And I think poverty is a good reason. Not being able to take care of a kid is a good reason not to have one. So is that like what you mean? Is that what you were thinking, where it's like, just because someone's poor doesn't mean like, that they should, is that what you were kind of?
Yeah. So I know some of the big arguments that I've heard for, the pro-choice side of things is that baby might suffer a lot, like even a lot, right? Or may cause the mother to suffer a lot. Like, for example, if she's like married to someone abusive. So there's the suffering argument, right? And so in my mind, I just don't personally believe that we should ever use suffering as a justification for killing. And like, obviously, I view the baby as a life. So I view an abortion as killing. So in my mind, do you get how that breaks down? It's like the suffering would suck, but I just don't believe it's a good justification in my mind that makes me feel comfortable with the ending of a life. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I know you don't agree, but you get what I'm saying, right?
So there's a story. I can't remember the boy's name, but it was just, I know it was just, man, this was a boy that like from the moment he was born, like it was constant abuse and torment from his parents until it eventually led to his death, and they like buried him in a cardboard box in the woods. I think he made it to 5 years old, but he was so tiny when he was initially found that he was initially thought to be like 2 years old, 18 months to 2 years old, even though he was actually 5. And I just, when I think of something like that, I feel like when a child's only existence was 5 years of torment before a horrific death, I just see like abortion, if the parents didn't want that kid and that's what was going to happen, like an abortion is just so much more humane to me. So out of those two scenarios, I would say like abortion, like do not do this to a kid. Like, of course, anyway, I'll throw that back to you, I guess. Do you feel like it's better for this kid to have been born and like tormented that long rather than to have been aborted? Right.
I think that's a totally fair question. And I think where this breaks down for me is that it's very, very difficult for us ahead of time to know how things are going to play out, right? And it's scary for me. Of course, like, I think it's horrible that kid was tortured for 5 years. And I will say that I do think some lives, the suffering is so terrible and so chronic that person probably would rather not be alive, right? I completely sympathize with that. What I don't like is making that decision for other people.
Neither do
and
I. That's exactly my point.
Right.
But we're making it's the person who's getting the abortion, like, to make that decision. And so the fact that we don't know who's going to abuse a kid, more or less, just the fact that like a kid that not being wanted is a really great start along that path. And so that's why, like, I guess it's connected to me. But I can see how for you it's like we don't know. And to be honest, a lot of abused kids are from like very conservative, very pro-life families. So it's not to say that an abortion or even like the people who are going to abuse their kids would have had an abortion if they had a chance to. So yeah, but I guess the point it comes back to me is to the mother, if there's any reason she doesn't want a kid, I don't want her to have a kid. Or the father, if the father doesn't want the kid either, like again, it's the woman's body, she has like immediate control over there, but a man should not be a father if he doesn't want to be, and same with the mother. So I just don't, I think kids like minimum, like, and I think it's a really low bar, and it's not even enough really, but just minimum like should be wanted. So but I guess we will just disagree on. All right. But that was my clarifying question. I did wonder why you think it is that a lot of pro-lifers, where you like differ from a lot, who are against birth control and who are against exceptions for rape and even life of the mother, you know, until it's dire. But even then, like one of the reasons I went to the Supreme Court was Idaho basically trying to argue that they have a right to not provide medical care to women who are pregnant, where like they don't want to affect the fetus, even if it's like life, you know, altering. That was the whole point. So anyway, I just wonder why you think it is that a lot of pro-lifers are that way, or that some will go to these extremes as to, you know, for like want to put out travel bans, which Idaho did just do. I don't know how enforceable it is, but yeah, travel bans across state lines for pregnant women, and then or the death penalty, as Texas is, I think, and Louisiana have at least talked about.
I don't actually know anything about travel bans as far as that goes. I've never really looked into that at all.
Yeah.
I've just online in discussing these things with people, I've seen a lot of pro-choicers call pro-lifers hypocrites for being pro-death penalty, but not, you know, not like how could you be against abortion but pro-death penalty? Does that make sense? And I was just like, I just didn't want that to be like a point of hypocrisy or something. That's all.
But yeah, you're saying like for you, you're not that way. But I'm just wondering why is it that so many people who like agree with you on this issue are anti-sex ed, anti-birth control, like all these other things as well? Why do you think? I just curious kind of thought
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't know what percentage of people have those opinions, honestly. So I don't know that it's even like a vast majority or something. I just know it exists. I honestly have no idea why anyone would be against sex education. I have no idea.
The reasoning could be that they may fear that you learn about sex and so you will have sex.
Yeah.
That's probably what it is, right? Like, I don't know.
I heard that in Mormonism a lot. And I honestly felt like it was like not good to learn it, because it's like if you're reading about it or you're talking about it, like at least to me, the line between like reading about it versus like smut, I guess, was like basically the same thing. College, you know, and I realized like it's okay for me to learn about this stuff. Like it's not meaning that I want to do it or I'm going to do it outside of marriage. So
and your other one, I was answering in my head, so I don't know if you guys care if I interject. I think the other one is consistency. I think people understand how birth control works, and so they find out that the mechanism is happening after conception, and so then they don't like birth control either. Where, and I don't know too many people that aren't okay with like condoms and preventing conception, but it's like, I do know that's how some forms of birth control are thought to have worked. Like it's after conception, but it prevents implantation, for example, and that would be thought of as immoral in their minds. That could be why. So I guess I was curious. Your line is conception, and so then that brought up infertility with me. Like, so there's people that will do in vitro, and that's after conception as well. Or at least some of the procedures are after conception, or the conception is happening outside of the womb, right? And so that was my question, was what are your thoughts on in vitro fertilization?
No, I appreciate that, because I do think it's important to distinguish, because so I feel conflicted on it. because I have some cousins that were born via in vitro. Obviously, like I'm super grateful for them, super love them. And it's hard for me, but I feel like I lean toward being against in vitro and against surrogacy because in my mind, okay, so when you do in vitro or surrogacy, you have several eggs and several sperm, right, that are being put together, and you've got to have some viable options, right? And so what ends up happening is they discard whatever ones, as far as I know. I haven't super looked into this, but from my very remedial understanding is that they're going to have to discard some of those. What do they call them at that point when they're joined?
Embryo.
Yes. Yeah. Some of the embryos have to be discarded. Whatever one is most viable and maybe the gender that the parents want is going to be implanted, right? So I don't like that because in my mind, I think to myself, like, Morgan was made when the sperm and egg came together, right? That was me. That was me from conception. That was me the whole time. And then I think of my siblings and like that was all them the whole time. So I think, what if my mom had done in vitro and it'd be like she's presented with six embryos, right? Because she had 6 kids and it's like Blake, Morgan, Brooke, Parker, it's all of us. And they tell her, you got to pick one, which one do you want us to implant? And the others are going to get thrown away, and obviously this didn't happen because she had us sequentially, but in my mind, it's the same idea. It's like each of those embryos is a unique human life and it's being discarded. And I don't like that. So long-windedly, I will say I am pretty against in vitro and surrogacy at this point.
Okay. And then one more, another hypothetical, there's a pregnancy that happens and we'll say it's earlier on, but they know that the fetus is not viable. It's not going to survive. But the body will carry without an abortion, the body will carry it and then it will just be born dead. Would you have a problem with an abortion at any point when they have that information that it's not going to be viable?
Like 100% guaranteed?
We're 100% guaranteed, yeah.
I'd be fine with that. Yeah, because I'd be fine with that.
But not 99%.
No, yeah, I would not be fine with 99%. Good question. That's the line right there. So if it was going to 100% die, and we knew it was going to die, like within the pregnancy,
not within.
That's what Marty's asking.
It would survive birth, right?
Oh, well, I don't know. I think that would change my answer.
The only way it's living is when it's connected to you, basically. Is that what you're saying, Marty? Like once it's born
and it will happen at birth.
Like it will not.
Like we're talking like
maybe it doesn't have like a heart, so the only oxygen it's getting is because your heart is pumping the blood there, something like that.
Yep. Some deformity that is
I guess
make it so
I might have to think more about that because I think
let's talk about informed consent a little bit, because I would think in this situation I would want a lot of information, any information available or possibly available, because the information that I have in my head that if I was in either of your shoes, again, that's me projecting what I think I would do. When you have a pregnancy that's not viable or it's not going to survive past birth, first of all, the chances of it actually dying sometime in the pregnancy earlier is a lot higher for non-viable pregnancies. And once it dies, the bigger it is and the further along, when it dies, the much higher risk there is to you or to the mother's body of it not being able to be expelled, of developing sepsis, a fever, and like things go downhill for you really, really quick. So if I have children that I want to still be a mother for, I want to end a risky pregnancy as early as possible, because that's the safest as possible, versus risking.
I do get that.
Yeah, but that my kids, I'll never see them again. They won't see me again, and there's no baby even in the end for that. Then it just seems all for nothing and quite tragic. So that would be information that would really affect my decision, and I would think Yours too.
Yes.
If I were to reduce like the two sides of the debate, and I think it's accurate, even though I am really simplifying things, there are two lives, when that are, I guess, at odds when you've got a pregnant woman, if they're at odds, because, obviously for a wanted pregnancy, there's no issue here. But for an unwanted pregnancy, the choice is, which life are you going to prioritize more, and that there's not a both. I know you kind of brought that up, Morgan, in your thing. I think, and this is a thing where it's just like, when it hits reality, it just does not work that way. So I would say the pro-life side favors the fetus over the mother, whereas the pro-choice side favors the mother over the fetus.
I
And
totally
so
agree.
when you're talking this way about like, that's not your body and like you can't do anything to the fetus, you're really saying that the mother's body is the fetus's body, and it's not right for her to do anything like with her, because her whole body belongs to the fetus, and it has to, because even if it's got a beating heart, that's not where it's getting its oxygen.
My logic also
it's getting from the mom. The mom is what's eating. All the nutrients are coming from the mom. It's her digestive system. It's it's her kidneys that are filtering out the toxins and getting them out of the body. Like it is all her body. And the fetus, if she doesn't want it, does not have a right to her body. Because for me, it's really easy, and I think there's some slippery slopes that are more realistic than others. So just to give like a non-abortion example, I know like growing up, my dad was really against gay marriage because it was the whole, well, what if someone's attracted to kids, or what if someone wants to marry their dog, or what if somebody wants to marry their toaster, and it's just like the whole thing is that it's consenting adults. So when you bring a kid in, that's not a consenting adult. An animal is also not a consenting adult, and neither is a toaster. So there's this hard line that makes like all of those others, well, like what if a toaster, just ridiculous, and not, it's not a real slippery slope, because no one's bringing in legislation to marry inanimate objects. You know what I mean? And so I feel like I guess like where the same like hard cutoff is your own body. So I've got my little Russian like Matryoshka dolls, all right, and I took some of them out, but like
demonstration,
like they're separate. Like they are separate. So there's no like, so they're both equal value. All right. But when you've got just the one and there's something inside of it, this is what has the most value. And so like that's the hard line. So when you're like, well, what about disabled children, blah blah blah, I have a disabled niece. She was born and they knew something was wrong well before my sister-in-law gave birth. And it was, I know, I don't know like the super personal details, but I do know that there's enough significantly wrong that they weren't sure she would survive much past birth, or if she did, she was definitely going to be very severely disabled, and that has a lot, a huge effect on your life. So an abortion was an option that she was offered, and I think she considered for a little bit, but ultimately she decided to go ahead and have my niece, and I think that was her right. But also having spent a lot of time in significant care for my niece, there's been times where I was like her full-time daycare provider, because she can't go to regular daycare because of the level of her needs and stuff. I would never fault anyone for not wanting to take on that burden. And then again, if we're going back to abuse, disabled kids have the highest rates of abuse and homicide and trafficking, and just all kinds of really awful things. Plus some people are just they're dangerous to others. My niece is one of them. And so if my sister-in-law had decided to abort my niece, I would have supported her in that. And she could have 1, 2, 3 or more children now, like as a mom, and just like a very different life than she has right now with just the one. And they can't even have pets because my niece is dangerous to pets as well. So basically, like the bigger she is, and she is getting big, she's going through puberty now, but she's got a toddler mindset, and she'll hurt anything that's smaller than her. So I think these are things that, bear consideration. But again, like ultimately at the end of the day, it's a woman making a decision for herself. It's not eugenics, because that's society wide. That would be, if there's mandates that, we mandate abortions for that, I would very much disagree with that, because again, it's violating the woman's autonomy. And so I think people should have the information to take on what they feel like their family can handle. And then yeah, I guess I don't know. I feel like that's the hard line. That's the real easy line. It's just like, can you see them like with your own two eyes? Like one of these has another doll inside of the other, like until it's outside and on its own, then what you see, who you see, that's who matters more. There's a slippery slope actually the other way.
Can I respond to that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I do see the two dolls.
Yeah.
And I do understand what you're saying. I just disagree that because the baby is inside the mom, that the mom gets precedence, right? So I understand you're saying, I completely understand what you're saying is that the mom's life should take precedence.
Right.
I just don't agree.
Yeah. I think this is agree to disagree part, but I think
and that's fine.
More up as a response to like the slippery slope.
Well, what was the slippery slope again?
We're saying like what made it scary to you, just the idea of abortion, that it's really subject to people's opinions, that poverty, disability, suffering, all of these things. Like where would the line be drawn at? Like in your original kind of opening statement, that was kind of what I was hearing from you there.
Yeah.
And so that's my answer is like the line is like when they're separate beings, they have their own body and they're not living off of another person's systems, then they're a person. And so there's my niece is not less of a person, even though she's severely disabled, because she's born and she's here. So it's a hard line. So I know maybe it seems cruel that like, why do I love my niece as she is, but I would have been okay with my sister-in-law aborting her, before we ever knew her. And the same with my other sister-in-law, when her also pregnant sister died, she already, my sister-in-law that did not die, her pregnancy was high risk also. And in fact, it was going to be the last one because they didn't want her to, have to try again, or like the risks would be a lot higher with further pregnancies. Anyway, so she was already a high risk pregnancy. Then her sister died. If she had chosen for any reason to get an abortion, I would have supported that too. But she didn't. My niece is born. I love my other niece just as much. And so, it's prioritizing the person who's here. So if my niece ever got pregnant and wanted an abortion, I would prioritize my niece over her fetus. But if she wanted to give birth, that did the same thing for like my great niece, same thing. Who's here, that's who. And that's the hard line there. But but yeah, I guess like you said, we disagree on like who to prioritize when one is inside.
Yeah. I think we're doing a good job finding where the line between us is. And so I think you nailed it when you said like you say, okay, the line is this person gets their own autonomy once they're separate from the mother. And I do understand that line of thinking, because then that gives the mother full ability to choose up until, the baby's born. So I do understand where you're coming from. I don't like it because in my mind, so much of what abortion is doing is trying to level the playing field of the unfairness of life. Okay. So hear me out on that for a second. I feel like wait, say it again.
I agree with that. I'll just give it to you. But if you want to,
sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. It's just like in my mind, to me, it's not a strong enough justification, right? It sucks. It's an unfair biological reality that women have to be the ones to bear the responsibility of being pregnant, right? That they have to deal with the consequences of it. That's just a natural unfairness. But I feel like an abortion is just trying to make it more fair by killing. And it's like, I don't think we should treat killing as something that we can use to level a playing field of fairness. I think life is always unfair. And I think it's sad when there's more suffering, especially more suffering than someone feels like they can handle. But I still just feel like in my mind, it's not a strong enough justification.
I think when you say it like that, you make it sound like it's, to make things fair, it's okay to kill like other people also. It sounds like you're saying the same slippery slope. If we say it's fair for abortion, then we're saying it's fair elsewhere.
No. I don't think, I'm actually not worried about that at all. I'm not worried that someone's going to say, well, we should now kill a 2-year-old because that will make things more fair. I don't think anyone's ever going to think that. But in my mind, killing a 2-year-old is the same act as killing a 6-month-old fetus. It's killing no matter how old the life is, right? I know you don't agree, but do you get what at least like where my brain is like,
I get where your
it's
brain
killing either way. So in my mind, it's like, I just feel like I don't like the idea of, in my mind, to be okay with abortion, I have to say whatever is going to happen if this baby is born, or if the baby was born, it's killing is worth avoiding that. And I feel like that's a really extreme stance, again, in my head. So it's like I have to pull myself back to, I just don't think suffering or unfairness is a good reason. Like the life of the mother being, you know, she's gonna die, that's something that I'm like, oh yeah, well that makes sense to me. Like I don't want 2 lives dying, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, does that make
No,
sense?
I'm seeing something
Yeah.
too. I just had a thought come to my mind because
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm thinking ultimately for me, the bodily autonomy is the most important thing. But that is a separate issue when we're looking at like consequences. So I guess I don't know. That was just like an instant clarification in my mind that there's kind of like two, at least for me, two separate subjects. Because I do like to bring up the consequences a lot, even though like they have nothing to do with the bodily autonomy of the woman. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that now that I'm saying it. So I guess I'm just thinking like
You're gonna have to explain more. What do you mean by consequences?
Yeah, I don't know.
yeah, like when we're talking about poverty, or we're talking about like the likelihood of, you know, someone seeking an abortion, you know, because they are young and uneducated and all of that, when we know the outcomes for that child are likely to be a lot of poverty and lack of education and just other, you know, maybe housing insecurity, food insecurity outcomes. We know that those are more likely for a mother in this situation. That when we're talking about, or at least when I'm talking about consequences, I'm not really actually talking about bodily autonomy anymore. I get that. It's just a comment, I guess, or a thought that I had. Does that make sense? But I think it's important to look at the consequences too, even if it's a separate thing, and like a reason why we bring all that up, because to me, like that's data, and it's the consequences matter so much more than, you know, than any even like hypothetical. And so I want to, and this kind of goes to my question when I asked you like why you think it is, which I don't know if I got a question. I think it was your answer was I don't know, which is fine. But why a lot of other pro-lifers are against sex ed, are against birth control, are against exceptions even for rape or incest, and then even like life of the mother to certain points or certain degrees. Like there's, you know, debate about what that even means. I think the reason why, and I guess I want to say that that's more of a slippery slope, because when you're prioritizing the fetus over the woman, it just naturally happens that kind of broadens out in general. And I think that's why there's such a correlation in society, where societies are, when they are anti-abortion and they have like stricter controls on that they do tend to have a lot of other very like anti-woman type laws. They, you know, either make it difficult to get out of marriage, which is also something that has been brought up here. There's just a lot of things that you know, and just like medical misogyny and malpractice, it puts women in a position where people don't care what their thoughts or experiences are, or what their level of suffering is over their reproductive ability. And when you do that, you objectify women. And that's why like all these other things across the board increase. So that's why like there is a relationship between anti-abortion laws and loss of freedoms and democracy, and stronger democracies tend to be pro-choice. But also, you know, the states that have the strictest abortion laws also have like higher maternal fatality rates. They have higher infant mortality rates. They don't have higher abortions because those are happening in surrounding states when people go out there. But that's also why some are bringing up, the travel bans. And I said travel bans for pregnant women, which is maybe not be very accurate. It's travel bans to seek an abortion. But again, if you're pregnant and you are traveling out of state to see your family and you're not seeking an abortion, but somebody reports that you are, and that is why you're leaving, like that can still affect a pregnant woman who wants to be pregnant. This just the fact that she is, or if she has a miscarriage out of the state, you know what I mean? Like that can be seen as abortion trafficking or whatever with these laws. And so anyway, and then the fact that that's why pro-lifers can be pro-death penalty for women, because it's actually not about the life. It is about controlling and punishing women, especially sexually, but also like rape also is higher. Homicide of women is high anyway, but I like that also increases for pregnancy, like abuse increases for pregnancy. And I there might be some weird like evolutionary reasons why that is. I don't know, but regardless, like all of these things go up. So I do see that as a slippery slope, and I see that as like literally happening now, that even like among teens and like, school aged kids, that there's sexual coercion being used over women, and especially like the whole abortion issue is a way to have a lot of power and control over a woman sexually and for her life. So that's what to me, these, I mean, they're correlated. I wouldn't say like any one of them is a particular cause. I guess I would say the cause or the root of all of these things is the same thing. And that is basically just objectification of the women. And so, I mean, even when it comes to like rapes and abuses, like women not being believed, it's just, again, it just always puts women in this thing of like, we're suspicious of her first. We're suspicious of why she's asking for birth control. We're suspicious of her when she says she needs this. And even if doctors say it, it's like, okay, but is she really, when a woman says she was, were you really raped, or is it because you want to terminate this pregnancy? So why are you lying? And that's already an issue, is, women are seen as lying, but just even like in the medical system, there's so much of like women's issues that just get ignored or just get, chalked up to like, that's what being a woman is. Like, it's just suffering all the way. So even if you know that you are suffering way more in your periods than anyone else, any other woman, like you're still going to have to go through 6 or 7 doctors that just say, that's just menstrual cramps, like suck it up and get over it. Like all the other women do, like, or women exhausted after giving birth, because there's a slow bleed or something, but it's just like, oh, you're tired. Well, you just gave birth. Welcome to motherhood, and it's like, no, but when women say, I think I'm more tired, I think there's something actually like really wrong here. And it isn't just I have a newborn. It's just like, no, that's not it. Just go back home. And that's why I think that women are dying, because there has to be basically a whole court held on whether or not they are actually dying to be able to get this abortion. And in the meantime, like they run out of time because she can't just be believed in the first place.
Do you mind if I interrupt? Michael Shermer had on a doctor from Colorado that does later term abortions, and a lot of people from all over the United States will go to Colorado to get them because he's one of the few providers that offers them. And it was interesting the way he framed pregnancy, because he actually was framing pregnancy as a sickness, like the pregnancy itself, like. So it's so weird. It was so foreign to me to hear it this way, because I have always heard like it's just so natural to give birth. Like that's part of womanhood. Like that's part of being a woman, is giving birth. And so if you get pregnant, well, you naturally go through pregnancy and then you give birth. That's the flow of things. And Michael Shermer had asked him a question, and he was like, so, I mean, you're not, how did he word it? Like when you have women coming in for later term abortions, it's not like they're not coming in late term just because that there's something wrong with the pregnancy, right? And he was corrected by the provider, and he said the pregnancy is the problem. Like the only time that a pregnancy ends in birth is if the mom wants a birth from it. That's kind of how he was framing it. And that was an interesting way to look at it, that I had never viewed pregnancy as something, a condition other than natural before. Like I never viewed pregnancy as a sickness or as, and in this provider's viewpoint, a healthy woman is one that's not pregnant. Once they are pregnant, they know how it's going to end. There's a lot of risks involved. If you don't want to go down that path, you shouldn't have to. And that was kind of his viewpoint.
Yeah.
I don't know, what are your thoughts after
I've heard a doctor described himself as pro-life, but I sometimes wonder if that's actually the way they frame it is more on the pro-choice side of things, I think. But I don't know. But I've heard of
he did not
no, not this guy. I'm saying like separately. I've heard of pro-life doctors referring to pregnancy like as I just like a parasite, and just being like, well, I mean, literally that is like basically what it is. It is all take from the mother, and there's no give. It's all risk to the mother and none for the fetus, except for when the mother is involved. So yeah, I would agree with that. And I guess maybe this is another answer to something like you were talking about, Morgan, when you're talking about prioritizing life. When you prioritize a fetus over the mother, you are giving the fetus a priority higher than any other person gets, like in any other scenario or situation elsewhere. So it's not equal. It's putting what's inside a woman over the whole woman. I would argue that because there is no such thing as a safe pregnancy. They are all dangerous. And it's the number one killer of women, like through millennia, like natural killer of women. And then especially like the younger you get, that's still, I think worldwide, besides things like, accidents, car accidents and things like that, the number one like natural killer of girls, like teenage, from puberty to 18, 19 is childbirth. That's the number one like natural killer of teen girls still, like today worldwide. So it's an extremely dangerous thing. And yeah, so I would agree with that. I call every abortion self-defense. I would say that it's all risk to the mother. So
yeah, I get where you're coming from with that. I get how you're saying you're elevating the baby above the mother.
Yeah,
I just
you are giving
see
it
that
rights
way.
to a body that's not theirs. So I almost feel like it's the same issue that you have with our side, but we've just flipped it. I do agree to have that the mother has more rights over what's inside of her, and ultimately can make that decision. Whereas pro-life has it flipped, where it's like the rights of the baby supersede the rights of the mother, and we don't do that any other time or anywhere else. No other human being has a right to another human being's body, except in this scenario that's granted to a fetus. So
yeah, but the scenario is the way that it is because the mother is pregnant, right? It's a pretty unique.
That doesn't matter to me. That makes no difference.
So your issue is more to do with the fact that the woman has to be pregnant. Like, I guess it is just I guess I don't understand that, because
A woman,
pregnancy is a
temporary. Pregnant. It doesn't matter if it's temporary.
Right.
That's something else controlling her body that she doesn't want. And to me, it's a much more significant violation to force a pregnancy and childbirth than a rape, for sure. I think objectively.
Oh, can you say that again? You said
I think forcing someone to be pregnant, to remain pregnant, or to give birth when they don't want any of that is a much more significant bodily violation than rape.
Wow,
that's wild.
Is that a common take? I've never heard that before.
Among pro-choicers, yeah. I obviously not from pro-life. Okay. Pro-life makes it sound like a lot of times that there's almost nothing wrong with forcing even a child to continue a pregnancy. Like that's when they say like two wrongs don't make a right. It's just like there's the idea that and that is like, I guess one I'll bring up a comment real quick. And then I think you might have to put it on the screen. But I have it here. I clipped this from someone that was arguing with me. And again, we were looking into a very young, case of rape, a 12-year-old girl pregnant. This person says, I would definitely consider it murder, even if it were a 12-year-old girl pregnant, even from rape or incest. I don't know why she says even, because it's always going to be rape if it's a 12-year-old. These are no reasons to end the life of a fetus. Yes, God has his plan. Always trust God. I'm not a hypocrite, only when the mother's life is at risk, and confirmed by doctor. And then I think she has an aneurysm at the end there. I'm not sure I need to end that. But anyway, yeah. So, and the thing is like with a 12-year-old, that's very young. That is absolutely way more risky, like to the mother. And again, a pregnancy can kill in just seconds. So, and even I think it was like right before there was a big case, like hit the news. It was a 10-year-old girl. They basically had to flee Ohio to Indiana, or it might have been vice versa, to get an abortion. And that was like right before that state was also like their abortion bans were just about to go in effect. So this 10-year-old just like barely makes it in time to, to get an abortion before the laws would make it illegal. And I just think like 10 is just so young. And the fact that she almost could not have, got it. And I guess that's also where like the reality comes into play. Like even when, I mean, first of all, there's people like this who don't see something wrong with a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old, like going through the most dangerous thing they could possibly be going through, again, in their own body against their will, just all for the sake of producing another human being. It's just really vile and violent to me. And I just can't imagine, like, I don't know, it really, honestly, like, you guys were benefited from wanted pregnancies. So you do have this feeling of, this thing growing inside of you, but just what if this was not something that you wanted growing inside of you? I just can't help but feel like a lot of body horror at that idea. I mean, and especially if it was from rape, that really extends the violation, the initial violation, if I don't want it there. And not everybody chooses that. So that's another thing, is like people want to make it sound like that's the like automatic solution for every rape. And I wouldn't say that either. Because I do know of people who have felt very empowered by choosing to have a child after rape, but that the empowerment is in the choice and the wanting that and deciding that for yourself. Like, I want this baby, and I want my body to go through. This is me reclaiming my body by being able to give birth to this baby. For other people, it is not a reclamation. It's further loss of autonomy. And then sometimes you end up with the rapist having parental rights, which is what happened, with my aunt, and she's got one kid dead because of it. So,
I'll respond to that, because again, I do understand completely where you're coming from with it, and I just think I don't think pregnancies are nearly as risky as what I'm hearing you say. And like, I guess I haven't looked at numbers, but I do think that influences my decision a lot, because I'm like, I think, especially in a developed country like where we're at right now, is that it's pretty easy to get whatever help that you need. But oh, damn it, what was I going to say? I feel like if you're going to look at this through the lens of the whole two rights and a wrong thing, it sucks. It is a horrible, awful tragedy if someone is to be raped, right? But I'm not entirely convinced that an abortion, obviously I'm ethically and morally against abortion, but I'm not entirely convinced that an abortion is mentally going to be easier, even for a young girl, than actually having the baby would be. Because, like you said, I do think there could be this empowerment of like, okay, I'm going to stick with it and not punish this child for something that wasn't this child's fault, and, give this child away to a happy, healthy family, assuming she can have a healthy pregnancy that isn't going to kill her, right? Which I think is more likely. And so in my mind, it's like, I get what you're saying is like, well, the empowerment comes from the choice, but I think that it's possible, and this is putting my ethics aside, because I still think ethically it's the wrong thing to do to have an abortion. But if I put my ethics aside for a second, I feel like I'm not convinced that emotionally some people would not be traumatized by the abortion that they can never take back, right? That's
It
got
sounds
to
like you're
happen
open.
sometimes,
Are you
right?
open to data on that? It sounds like you would. I don't have any, so I'm not gonna like bring anything up, but I'm just curious if we again go hypothetically. Let's say the data was like overwhelming that, especially with the rape victims and especially when they're younger, that abortions are like significantly physically and psychologically more healthy. Do you think that would
That's a good question,
difference?
right?
Yeah,
Right.
post.
And I don't know, first of all, I don't know how we could prove that because you'd have to compare them having the baby to them having not had the baby. So I don't think you could accurately, do you know what I mean? Like,
I think you
because,
could. I mean, like if self-reporting, just like girls
yeah,
who are raped do have like higher levels of depression and this, that, the other, whereas girls who got the abortion, just
I
like
see what you're saying. I see what
overwhelmingly,
you're
like
saying.
the outcomes are really different.
In
That's
my mind, no, I think you guys will be interested to hear this because in my mind, my answer to that would be I think the only reason they feel mentally healthier in that situation is because they're deeply separating themselves from the fact that that was their child that they aborted. So in my mind, it's like, okay, you can maybe convince yourself that that wasn't a big deal. And maybe you can successfully convince yourself that that wasn't a big deal, but I still think it's a big deal. Does that make sense?
I think you're adding on. I don't think there actually has to be a separation. I think you're adding on the extra like burden of seeing it as a child, which I do not, and
Yes, yes. This is where we disagree, but it's
so
very
yeah, so
telling,
it
right?
wouldn't
Yeah,
feel to
yeah.
them like I'm killing my child to be better. And I think, oh, I was going to go somewhere else with that too. But I was going to say, like, if you have to convince yourself something, I don't know. I guess see it if we go back to like ex-Mormonism analogies. When they say like we're convincing ourselves that we're happier outside of the church, or we leave because
I
we
see
can
where yeah, yeah.
that.
Right,
I think
right.
if you are convincing yourself that you're okay with something that you're not okay with, I think that creates a lot of issues. And I think we've all been there. And I think we're where we're at now because that's what it took to resolve some of those issues. So
Right.
so I see that, and I do think I agree that people can be very manipulated either way. I severely dislike when I hear of women getting manipulated into abortions just as much as into having children. I do feel like one has much worse outcomes than the other, but again, like ultimately the autonomy is what matters to me. And so I very much hate people being like forced, and it is usually teenagers again who are being told like to get abortions and whatnot, often by their parents who are like ashamed of them or something, and I really hate that. My last question.
So my last point, I kind of wanted to throw back to the example you gave at the beginning when we were talking about the suffering, and you brought up the example of that child. And I've heard that story, by the way. I remember that being in the news where there was that kid that was like tortured and killed and all that. And so on the flip side, I have a friend named Lily who she was basically like a perfect abortion case because her dad was in prison and her mom was bipolar, schizophrenic, alcoholic, like absolute nightmare. And like even kicked her and her sister out of the house when they were like 10 and 13 years old. Like it was an absolute disaster. And I feel like in that scenario, there would have been a lot of people that would have said it would have been better off, if Lily had been aborted than have to deal with all that suffering, right? But now here she is. She's an adult and she is like a health coach and she's like doing all these things to better the world and help people improve their lives and like teach them about nutrition, and like she loves her life. And she told me all about how happy she was with friends at school and friends at church despite her situation at home being really bad. So I think one of my biggest issues with abortion just kind of comes back to like I don't feel like it's a comfortable position for anyone to be in to say that certain life suffering is not going to be worth it, or that suffering couldn't be overcome, right? In that kid who died when he was 5, his suffering was not overcome, and that's super sad. But of course, I think there's a lot more examples, especially here in the United States, where that suffering does, be overcome. And one last little thing I'll add to that with the whole suffering argument is that I know that there's a lot of women in really, really difficult circumstances. Like, for example, she's dating someone or maybe even married to someone who's super abusive, right? And she finds out she's pregnant. And in my mind, yes, it would be way easier for her to get out of that marriage or to get out of that relationship if she doesn't have the financial burden of a child, right? And legal issue of like having to have co-parenting with him. Like, what an absolute nightmare. But in my mind, it's like I can't draw that analogy and not like think to myself like, well, it would also be like, what if she had a 2-year-old? No one would be like, oh, well, it'd be easier for her to get out of the marriage if she just got rid of the 2-year-old. It's so like that might sound kind of extreme, but in my mind, it's the same justification. It's like I don't think we should ever end any life to alleviate the suffering of another life. So that's where I try to remain consistent on that. So if you want to respond to that, then we'll do the questions.
When I hear that, to me, it's the same category as like I'm glad to be here. I like my life. I like who I am. I would rather be here than not. But if I was here because my mother was raped, I'm not going to say like, look, like rape turns out okay sometimes, or the fact that any of us are here because some 12-year-old was raped in early Mormonism as, wife number 23 or something. We don't use that to be like, but look at all these other good things that happened, that doesn't, I think, and that to me, it's the same category. And I understand why it would not be for you, but yeah, I guess that's my answer. And that's how I see it. And that's how I categorize it.
Thanks.
Yeah. My last kind of burning question is kind of going back to the results of things. If there were data to your satisfaction that the things I brought up, that when you have abortion bans, you have increases, in homicide, maternal fatality, infant fatality, also abortions, child abuse suffering, all of those things, would your ethics still say that even if like all measures of society are like objectively worse, that it's still better to to view the fetus as life as more than the mother, whereas if you switched it, that's what I'm wondering. I did not word that very well, but
I get what you're saying. Yeah. I would have to, I feel like I'd have to pick that apart a little bit because like, for example,
if there were data to your satisfaction that you found credible and believable that was the case, would that
well, I'm hesitant to answer that because like I know that there are, like when I was doing the research for this for tonight, like I know there's a lot of articles saying that abortion rates increase in situations where abortions are illegal, and that makes absolutely no sense to me. Like, I just don't understand how it is that, like, let's say 100 women want or need an abortion, and then all of a sudden it's illegal, and what, now 1,200 women want? And that doesn't make sense to me. And I also don't know if those stats were real, where the hell we would get them from if abortions are illegal. How are they being?
I feel like I can answer that, but I also don't want to get in the weeds. So let's just say that there is data that explains that to you or explains how that is, and you go and you find it credible and you understand that is the case. I guess what I'm hearing is that it's hard for you to put yourself in that hypothetical, I guess.
Yes, I guess like it's one of those things where I am feeling distrusting of the information because it doesn't make logical sense to me. And so I feel a little bit trapped because I'm like, oh yeah, if I say, that if I saw that evidence, then I would believe that way. I'm just like, but that it doesn't make sense to me how that evidence could exist when if your abortions are illegal, then they wouldn't be reported, right? But I digress. I will answer the question, and I will say,
didn't that happen like with Mormonism? I will say, wasn't there a time where you're like, what data could possibly be out there that would like take all of this apart that I know?
I'll answer the question. I will answer the question, and I will say that I think in my mind, the reason I'm not okay with abortion is because I don't like to use anything to justify murder other than like self-defense, right? And I don't consider, and I don't see it in the same way as you, as like just because I'm pregnant and there's a risk of dying when I'm pregnant, that it's you know, in that same realm. I don't see it that way. But so my answer to that is I am not one who is a fan of the ends justify the means, right? So if you're asking like, well, if we have more abortions, you know, less mothers are going to die, is like part of that, right? Like infant mortality and mother mortality and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, I don't like saying, yes, I'm going to be okay with abortion if less mothers die, because it's still, in my mind, more death happening when abortions are happening. And so it's kind of like, I don't know, I'd have to look at all the numbers and be like life for life trying to pick it all apart. But in my mind, I also, we didn't really get a chance to get into this, but I'm very much believing the idea that a lot of abortions are convenience, you know, and they're not because of rape or incest or more serious ailments. And because of that, I'm very hard pressed to answer in the affirmative with this, because I certainly don't think that getting abortions out of convenience or as like a post birth control type situation is appropriate. So that's, I don't know, that's my convoluted answer to that question. Marti, do you want to answer it? I'm
Yeah,
curious.
it looks like you had a thought. I don't know if I was reading that right or not.
Well, I having like a philosophical thought, so which is sometimes hard for me to articulate, so it might not come out. But I had this hypothetical, like when you asked that, Maven, and maybe knowing what Morgan's stance is, it reminded me of asking you if you had data that showed that we euthanize all fifth and on children, so like fifth, sixth, seventh, so anybody that had more than 4 kids, and we euthanize all of the kids that are the 5th kid on, and that had better outcomes for society, would that be okay? Like,
that's a great question. So for me, it ultimately comes down to the bodily autonomy. So I would say even if outcomes were better, I would disagree with that.
Right. And so that's why I was smirking a little bit, not because like I think this conversation is really hard because a lot of people that don't like abortion are operating in a totally different starting point of what life is. And I feel like until you get past that, it's really hard to find common ground, I guess. It's just really hard because it's like,
I feel like that's reflected in our conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
I think we've come, like, we understand each other, but the common ground has not been much.
No.
But
yeah,
I think you're right for the reason why. Yeah.
I think we've done a good job though,
like, I'm just
figuring out where each of us all stand on it, which has been really effective. So
yeah.
I have some questions if you want.
Yeah, let's do that.
I've got some rapid fire ones. Is it wrong for a boyfriend to talk his girlfriend into abortion if she doesn't want one, but they have really bad circumstances, like they're poor and maybe like addicted to drugs?
Ooh.
And this isn't, I'm not trying to be like a gotcha.
No,
I'm genuinely curious because, like, what if in that scenario the abortion would be better for her? Like, would it be okay for the boyfriend
with
to
a
talk
drug
her
addicted
into
mother? I think an abortion is better for her and the fetus. So that's one issue. The boy, the boyfriend pressuring her is an absolute no for me, because again, it's the bodily autonomy.
So if it was like her mother telling her to do it,
I would also disagree with that.
Okay, so the issue, okay, so I said, so you think an abortion would be good for her, but no one should try to persuade her?
Not persuade. I would agree, not persuading, but informed consent. I would want I would want her to be able to get like really good information about the procedure for her, the outcomes for her, outcomes for the kid, like all these kinds of things. And then for her to make an informed choice. And that's what I feel like is lacking a lot, honestly, is informed consent in a lot of things. Yeah.
So you're okay.
So
with
it would be okay for
just
the
not
boyfriend to say like, "Hey, I think this would be good for you," as long as he wasn't like forcing it or coercing or pushing or something.
I'm all for a discussion, but at no point should he say like, you should do this or I want you to do this. But it's like, here's what we're dealing with. Here's, like either I'm gonna leave you because I don't want anything to do with this or whatever, or I don't if we're gonna have a kid, I think we should clean up. Do you feel ready? Because I don't feel ready, and I don't want this kid taken away from us or born addicted to drugs or with fetal alcohol syndrome or something. Like these are like, can you stop drugs for the baby or not? Like those are things that obviously I think people would discuss. But if he's like, I don't want a kid and I think you should abort it, I disagree with that very much. Yeah. And the same with parents. Yeah.
Should men be allowed to get financial abortions? Have you heard of what that is?
I'm guessing like a man saying, I don't want to have anything to do with this kid and I don't want to be financially responsible for it.
Yeah. I was just curious if you've ever heard of that, or if you have if you don't have an opinion on it, it's
I've
fine.
heard of it. I feel like a lot of men do it anyway, as much as it's against the law. A lot of men find ways around not providing for their children anyway. And I feel like, I guess the I don't know. Actually, I don't have a
Yeah,
a
no,
short or
that's
long
cool.
of that
That's
one.
cool.
Yeah, because it's hard for me to not think about all of the other issues, because I do feel like I feel like it's very wrong for a woman to entrap a man to be a baby daddy, especially if she full on knows that that's not what he wants. And birth control fails, but if she deliberately does something to sabotage it or go after off of it, I consider that an assault on the guy's autonomy to not be a father, to try to circumvent something like that. But at the same, I also feel like men want to have their cake and eat it too. So they want to have sex, and a lot of times it's actually the men that are most irresponsible and more likely to sabotage birth control that a woman is trying to be on, than vice versa. And so I just feel like there's I guess an uneven balance of control in that situation. I feel like men do have more control, and so for them to kind of pull out financially, that's what I feel like. I feel like there's a power imbalance. It's not like just a physical one, and so to me it's not exactly equal, but but it would be interesting if that were to be the thing, and if it was like, don't want to be a father, keep your dick in your pants, just as much as they say like for women to keep their legs closed. I just don't think that would go over as well for men as they're comfortable doing for women, even though it takes two to tango, as the saying goes.
In a world where a woman can always get an abortion, then maybe in that world a man could get a financial abortion as well. But since we don't live in that world, it doesn't seem fair that a man can do that in this, because women have restrictions on it. Well, that was one thought that I had if I were going to be the devil's advocate for a view that I don't really have.
Well, that makes sense. And I just had another thought too. Again, like one thing about the finances, first of all, that it's not a bodily autonomy issue. Like the man's body itself is not being violated. But now like the child is born. So we've, again, got that hard line where like, okay, now we do have the baby. So it's like, this baby needs to be taken care of. So again, like once it's born, it deserves, I think, the world from its parents. It's just, it's the birth is where like that line is for me, where it's separate from the mother. So
that's interesting. But as far as
it's not quite the same,
carrying the pregnancy,
right?
There is no really choice. You don't feel like the father has much of a say as
no, actually, I think I don't think it, because it's apples to oranges. If we were to do apples to apples, like could a woman like be willing to give birth and then be like, hey, this is your kid and I don't want anything to do with it and I don't want to financially support it? That's to me apples to apples. And I would find like either sex not wanting to take care of a child that they have as equally wrong. So the issue with pregnancy is just it's the woman's body that makes sense. Violation here. Yeah. So And there's stuff like that too, where women will just fuck off and leave their kids, you know, they don't care what happens to them, you know. It's more likely a man, but women can be pretty heartless too. So yeah.
Next
I feel bad for
question.
saying that actually, because I want to say, like, I think in cases where women are more likely to do that, it's probably maybe a situation where they maybe would have wanted an abortion and they couldn't, so that like mother like child bond doesn't develop, because it's not my child that I want, but it's something, you know, being forced out of me that I don't want. I don't know if that's true or not. That was just an idea that maybe there's a connection there between not wanting a kid and then, or, you know, being forced to give birth and go through a pregnancy and then, you know, wanting nothing to do with it after. Honestly, that makes a lot of sense to me psychologically. And that's just not something that would happen with the man.
Do you think all pro-life men want to control women's bodies, or just some of them?
I
And
think,
this is not a gotcha. Like, I'm
yeah,
genuinely curious because I know you've talked about that before,
yeah.
and I just wanted to clarify that.
I know it's something that people push back on a lot, and I wouldn't actually say pro-life men, but I would include women as well. I know they disagree with me on that, but ultimately that's all it does. If the data I'm seeing is I just think you're wrong. Just when I was Mormon and I served a mission, I thought that I was bringing like the true gospel to the world and something that would make people happier. But like, even though that was my intention and my thought of what I was doing, the fact of the matter was, the reality of the matter was that I was paying a very corrupt organization for the privilege of being door-to-door salesman for it, and, you know, in a way that really objectively harms more people than it helps. And that's the reality. So, you know, or just like when people say like, I'm not racist, but, and they say a racist thing, it's like, no, that's racism. Like, that is, so saying I'm not this, or this is not why I'm doing something, when like the result is that's all that's happening.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm
So
saying.
you're like
Inherently,
inherently
like, I want to control women, but I do think that is deep down the core of it. It's just not something that, I think it's a subconscious thought that hasn't made it into some, you know, into conscious thought. That's what I would say.
okay. So it's like, because like banning abortion is controlling a woman's body, then by nature that opinion has to be like, that's like inherent that they want to control women's bodies.
There's other things they could do to bring it down,
which is worse than rape.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that's another thing. Just like even with rape and stuff, with as much effort as they're putting into some states with these abortion bans and going after them, like, it's hard not to sit here and think sometimes like, they if they cared, they all of this time they could have been putting this many resources towards like making sure rape kits get done, again, consent and sex ed in schools, trying to reduce the rates of rape, because they start very young. A lot really start as teenagers, and just anyway, just things like that, or pedophiles, like with the fact that so many can like get away with it over and over and over again, or get sentenced for a year or two and then, you know, just come back out, when like data shows that people who do this to kids like are not safe around kids ever. There's no repentance, there's no reform that's been shown to be proven. And yet, like, to molest a child, first of all, like, so many people don't even serve prison for, you know, it's just, I just feel like all this time they've had resources to go after these kinds of things, but they just never do. And instead they've got all of these resources now to like go after and punish women, even to, you know, trying to put laws, even if they fail, like laws that go into force either for travel bans, or for the death penalty, or for like no exceptions for rape, which some states have, you know, like there is no exceptions for like the age of the, you know, it doesn't matter if you're 10, if you're past the 6 weeks, you know, or whatever, or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And so that's what's, I guess, the issue.
Ask a question about resources there. Like, I feel like we have enough resources to do both of those things. Like, so
yeah, but we're not.
Like, I just don't understand why it's instead. Like, I'm not sure I understand why.
I think the undercurrent is
if there's
misogyny.
someone,
It's not,
some,
it doesn't matter enough to really go after and punish rapists, because I think it's really common. And so it's just another place where like what women want for their body and what happens to them and what suffering they go through just matters less than, you know, potentially, like, what do they always say? Like, you know, for these guys in court, you know, or, you know, like, what is his name? Alan or Brock or whatever he's trying to go by. It's just like, oh, he's got such a bright future ahead of him. Like, do we really want to, or this guy's been a pillar of the community. You know, he was the mayor and he, you know, was really involved in church. Like, do we really want to ruin his life because he molested a kid? And I say, yes, yes, we should. But that's always the narrative when it's like guys molesting children. But then, you know, when it's women who are raped or women who want abortions, it's just like, you slut, you evil cunt, you know, it's just like, you baby murderer, you this, you that. It's just like, keep your legs closed. Oh, your life's ruined. Well, I guess you should have thought about that. You know, it's the whole, and like Flip likes to come to my comments all the time to be like, why can't women just keep their legs closed? Like, it's the same thing. And even promiscuous women, like the more data we have on that shows that the majority of women who are those ones that we want to hate on and that we want to say that they're irresponsible, that they're using it as late-term birth control and stuff, promiscuous women, like, overwhelmingly have child abuse in their backgrounds, child sexual abuse at some point when they were very young. And the very few that don't almost always have something like medically wrong, or, you know, something affecting hormones or their brain neurologically. It's just, you know, so when people say that, it's just like, I wouldn't say a rape victim, like, to them, they should have kept their legs closed. But it's the same thing when you're looking at older women, like, who are promiscuous and who are irresponsible. They're rape victims, they're child rape victims, like, overwhelmingly most of the time. So that's why I see it, you know, it's just, and again, like, when it takes two people to get a woman pregnant, but like it all, not just the pregnancy, but just also all of the responsibility on the woman. When again, like, it's men who are more likely to mess with birth control. It's men who are more likely to entrap women with babies, as much as it seems like the other way around. That's the data that I understand. It's just, again, it's just always, you know, and again, it's just the fact that it's like, well, women should keep their legs closed. If that's just all focused on the woman and none on the man at all. And it also doesn't take into other like realities that she's facing, you know? So
I mean,
that's why I feel like it's misogyny, like, all the way down. And that's why it's correlated with like medical neglect for women and like reproductive care. And it's just all across the board. Women matter less.
Let me try to clarify something that you said and make sure I'm addressing it. So you mentioned that some resources are being spent on laws, on like abortion ban laws and like interstate travel laws and stuff, instead of, and then you listed a bunch of stuff that I probably mostly agree with. And I guess that's your view, is that there's limited resources to be spent and you can't do.
No, I'm not saying they're limited.
Both the legislation and be against both. Like, I guess that's where I was trying to address.
The resources aren't limited. It's the desire that's lacking. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. That clarifies.
The same with like child marriage. It's legal in way too many states still at really abysmally young ages even. And so it's like, you know, that's been allowed. I mean, like, it's a law on the books that it's legal, you know, under these circumstances or with these ages. And we're not talking like Romeo and Juliet stuff here where we've got 14 and 15 or 15 and 16. Like, the majority of underage brides are like Joseph Smith situations. These are underage girls with like well adult men that are in these, like, most of these marriages are of this type. And it's just like, not even as like that being fought, like, nobody's really, I mean, not nobody, there are people that are out there fighting, but it's just not enough to actually like make it a priority to actually happen. And again, the fact that it's a law on the books means that the effort was put into making it okay so that it's not criminal for these things to happen. So that's what I'm saying. That the priority, it's one, just wanting to like slut shame and hate on women and control them. And we've got all of this. Now we've got all these resources to do this now that it's finally legal to do so with the Dobbs decision. Whereas we didn't ever care about these things and we still don't. But now all of a sudden, now we've got all this money. Now we can go after women in this way. And yay, we're saving kids.
Last question. You ready for this? I'm genuinely just curious.
Okay.
Do you think men should be allowed to vote on abortion laws?
I don't know how to answer that. I don't know.
It's okay if you don't. I was just curious.
Um, I don't want them to, because it seems like most of them are
Abusing
unable
it.
to really like have the full empathy, because it doesn't affect them. I don't think they can really understand and vote in ways that benefit women. And I think, yeah, so I think it's just something that they don't understand. And so I don't like it, but I don't see any way that could like actually be regulated, unless it was also like women can't vote about vasectomies or something. You know what I mean?
Level the playing field.
Maybe it's not so much men versus
Well.
women, but I think this should be like a medical thing that medical professionals, like the ones who have the most knowledge about these things, I would be more comfortable that laws follow data and experts, I guess, versus men versus women.
Yeah, it should probably, the line should probably actually be drawn like pro-choice, pro-life. Like pro-life people can't vote.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that makes sense.
I don't know how we would do that.
That'll solve the problem.
That'll stop the arguing, I guess. This has been really
Sorry.
awesome, guys.
Yeah, no,
This has been
Where
really
my
good.
mind went.
No. There have been some people, and again, I don't know if I follow this with the data, but this is something that I've seen on the pro-choice side, is that when you have abortion bans and you make them illegal, you do actually make it easier to disenfranchise more women from voting, you know, by making it a felony or something. So you do actually, and some people suspect that is also behind abortion bans, that ultimately removing the vote from women. And that is something that has been offered by like a lot of the extremists on that end of things, is that they don't want women voting, because they do tend to vote for at least some protections for abortion.
Well, we have some common ground there. I'd be against that.
Yeah, I certainly hope that wouldn't happen. I do see it as more extreme, but anyway, that was just a little tidbit, I guess, as for the voting issue.
Awesome. So do we have any ahas from our studying, or
I already gave mine.
I was just gonna say, I was actually really shocked to see that like overwhelmingly most abortions happen at 13 weeks or sooner, and I genuinely didn't know that.
Along those lines, when I was looking at the rate for late term, third trimester abortions, what I came across was that it's like 1% or less than 1%, and I honestly thought it would be a little bit higher than that. But yeah. And also finding out that third trimester abortions are most likely to be inductions, because they are safer than actual like surgical ones, which are more likely to happen in the second trimester. That's something new that I learned in the course of this.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, this was awesome, guys. I feel like we did a really good job, like keeping it chill and productive. And
I really appreciate you guys being willing to do this, especially since it looks like it might just be happening on my channel. So it was really kind of you guys to come in and talk to me about it.
I think let's not have it be super long. Like, what would change your mind?
Mm-hmm.
So what would change my mind on abortion? And I already said this to you gals when we talked before, but the first thing that came to my mind was like, if I knew God was real and that he could like, and souls were a thing, and he could like reallocate the souls over into like other babies' bodies, you know? So it just, in my mind, it would remove the killing aspect out of it, right? Because it'd be like, oh, if that soul still, that life like kind of still gets a chance to live, that would change my mind, which is kind of weird. I've never heard anyone say anything like that, but it makes sense that if my primary concern is that life is unfairly ending, then it makes sense that the solution in my head would be somehow that life ending is not actually a life ending, and then I feel better.
That makes sense.
So if there was a fetus heaven, then it wouldn't be so bad.
Yeah, fetus heaven.
they come right back around like some other
like
time.
All dogs go to heaven except fetuses.
Yeah.
Love it.
Which I would think there's actually doctrinal basis for that, like at least in Mormonism and Christianity.
Depends on the religion.
You're looking at it like a hell kind of a view, and if you're thinking but That's the whole thing.
I would think in a lot of religious views, it'd be like, oh, the baby's just going to go to heaven. But it's funny because most religious people don't really think that because they're just like, no, you can't have an abortion. I don't know. It's kind of weird because my view is like opposite. I feel like the normal view, which is a lot of religious people, that's their reason for being pro-life. Whereas mine is like, oh, I'd actually feel better if I knew God was real. So it's just kind of funny.
I struggled to answer this actually until like what you just said. I think something clicked into place like for me.
Yeah.
Whereas you said you would have to kind of feel like the fetus isn't as human anymore. Like you would have to feel like that's not a life like being killed. And I feel like for me, like the main like most sacred issue is the bodily autonomy. And so for me, I would have to have a shift where I think for me, where like the results in society matter more. I still like deeply, deeply dislike the idea of forcing a woman to be pregnant who does not want to be. But like, I mean, when I was one of the first steps from going pro-life to pro-choice is like not liking abortion, but still seeing why it's better overall for it to be an option. And so I think that's what it would be for me. I would severely dislike somebody being forced to do something against their will. But if it was like proven that abortion bans, like, raise everybody financially, educationally, mental health, physical health, like if just everything was better for individuals and families, I think that's the only thing that could kind of sway me. And I would have to, my priority would have to shift away from bodily autonomy to society as a whole for me to find that worth it. And it would be the same as like when my first little step into pro-choice is I don't like it, but I see why it's important. Yeah.
That's a fun question that you presented to us, Maven, at the last chat. And I think it's a very interesting question. I feel like I need to ask myself that on more things just to kind of, I don't know, like double check my thinking on things.
Yeah, for anything.
Yeah, it is really interesting.
Yeah. And we can be wrong about it too, because I mean, when I used to think like what would take me from Mormonism, like the only thing that I could think of was like a super spiritual experience or like an angelic visitation saying like it's the Jehovah's Witnesses or something like that. Like I'd be like, okay, that's what it would take, because I didn't think that it was possible that there was any like secular information that could possibly change my mind. And I was
I'm totally with you on that.
At the end of the day,
Also, it would suck if Jehovah's Witnesses were right.
I know.
Well, thank you, Morgan, and thank you, Maven. You guys did most of the work, and I have just been puttering along. So
just looking beautiful over there.
Yeah, definitely.
That's all you gotta do is sit, look pretty.
We'll end with that.
And thanks for moderating.
That was awesome, guys. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Have a good
job,
night,
everybody. Good night.